Great, thank you. And I just want to take one moment to thank Svetlana. I mean, this format was her idea. So in the past, we've worked with various projects, and we've sort of worked to get them up and running. In this case, we were really responding to some critique from Quinn Dabrowski that, you know, a quick introduction to a tool is often not sufficient to get you actually up and running. It may be that, okay, now I know what Gephi is, or oh, now I know something of Omeka, but it's a long road from that first sort of nibble to an outcome that has relevance to your peers. And so in this session, we really wanted to focus on that process. And really, it's very experimental. We're not going to come up with anything that, you know, would be published yet, or that will, but we wanted to share the process of experimenting and making sense of this, and how you would use the Project corpus in your scholarship, and the ways that you could leverage technology to ask new questions. And so I really was excited not only that we were working with Projeta, which is, and I feel so lucky to be working with this corpus. It's amazing. Like this just doesn't normally happen, that someone says, oh, here, have my data. I've got 400,000 diary entries I'd like you to look at. It's just like, thank you. And that, you know, this has been a great experience working with scholars. So I've learned quite a bit about the process of getting from the raw data to actual scholarship. So that's what the challenge that we were given from Projeta was to, you know, how can we best make these collections available for scholarship? What kinds of transformations need to happen? What format do they need it in? What kind of dialogue? How does that happen? And, you know, some of you may have strong opinions or know a lot about the scholarship on this. For me, you know, this is my job, but, you know, it is still a very new field. And so I've learned a lot from this process, and I'm happy to share what we've come across and to share the corpus with you. So obviously we're working from primary sources trying to get to scholarship, and I'm filling this question mark void here. So Misha and his volunteers carry us from the physical materials into a database. So all of this for me started with a shared file of the database. So behind that, the projeta.org website is a MySQL database. And so you can just do SQL dump and share that as a file. So I started with the raw SQL file. My goal was to get it into some form, typically a CSV file that Asya and Phil could work from in their experiments that they'll talk about later. And so my question has been, you know, what goes here? Like, what do you do there, and how do you do it well? So just quickly, Misha has introduced you to the project. The data that I have is a little bit dated, but as Misha mentioned, we have 2,800 men, 800 women, but this is 930 megabytes of text. That's plain text. That's like a gigabyte of just text. It's 32 million words, and they've transcribed about 64,000 pages. So this is, I mean, I try and picture that on a shelf, and or in a library, and I guess that's like I don't know. It's an awful lot of text. So time-wise, the first entry is from 1581. Приехал новый московский гонец, and the final one is a little bit poetic from 2018, which I'll let you read if you care to. So in total, we have 437 years in this collection. So it's not even, as Misha has described, and I think he's given a very good explanation of why we get this peak. Here, I didn't mention, if you go to the beginning, I welcome you to follow along, if you like, in my slides. So bit.ly.janco-aces 2019. Most of these things have links in them. And this one will take a second, so I'll come back to it. one of the problems I came across is that with a little virtual machine and 400,000 diary entries, there are some major infrastructure problems in working with that much text. And that's actually something that I haven't overcome yet. Let me see here. There we go. So this is working now. But it's a lot of data. And it's a lot of data to put into a single graph. Here we go. The nice thing is once you get it up and running, oh my God, it's going to kill my computer. So we need to, there are definitely some infrastructural issues to overcome. But you can see, I mean, it is definitely, there is a center of distribution in the 20th century. And particularly between 1890 and 1990. So I think an interesting question, I'm going to try and throw out ideas. So for the graduate students looking for dissertations or just anyone looking for article ideas, this seems striking to me. And I think we could talk with Misha, you know, there's definitely sort of a plateau here. And is this the result of, you know, the collection itself? Is it a phenomenon where during this particular period of history, people felt that there was something important going on and they felt they needed to write about it. But here we actually can ask computational, quantitative questions about this as a phenomenon. So I'd really love to explore this further. One thing that I've tried to think about is the coverage of the corpus, because in many cases we have a very small sort of window into a person's life. And so one thing I think we could do more with is thinking about what periods of history and what moments in history we have coverage of. That's a programming term, but I think it could be useful here. And so these are just little charts of this is when the person was born, this is when they died, and the box tells us the period in which we have diary entries. So if you can do this at scale, so this is actually a candlestick chart used in finance. But what it lets us do is look at scale and see the opening, the close. It's a little weird in that it's encoding it as green or red based on the profit or loss of the diary. I don't know where it's getting that from, but but what it does let us do is, you know, we have 400 years of diaries, and we can start asking these kinds of questions about, you know, what kind of coverage do we get from this collection? And so for each of these diaries, we can see the small window into history that we have from that particular diary. And actually, many of them, or it seems like the overriding number, are very, very tiny windows. It's a month. It's 2-3 months. Does that sound consistent with your experience? That many of the diaries are short period? Okay. So that's not something I would have expected. Just coming into this, I would have thought, you know, okay, I started when I was a teenager and I ended when I was 40 or something like that. But that, by and large, we get very, very brief insights into people's lives. But when we look at it at scale, we get quite a bit. So my part in this project was to take us from Misha's SQL. I developed an application that will let you take the raw dump from Projeta. It loads the persons table. These are the keywords, the notes. I don't know why you call the entries notes, but
it's a result of our first programmer.
Okay, so some programmer decided that notes were diary entries, but that's fine. And then there are diary entries, so there are about 4,000 diaries in here. And so one decision that I made as part of this process, it wasn't deliberate, it was mostly that it's what interested me, is that I wanted to take this, and so this is all of the human curated, human transcribed, human marked, described sections, and then I wanted to also machine read it. So I was interested in if we use machine learning, if we use natural language processing, what other data can we add? How can we enrich this collection? Because there's a very common problem I come across is that you have volunteers, people come in, they spend a few hours, and you get a couple hundred entries. You have a few documents processed. But then you need to get from there to the 100,000 other documents that need to be transcribed. And so I started with an exciting development. This is Rubert from ITMO. So those of you that haven't been following natural language processing, this is an extremely exciting time. Things have gotten much, much, much better. I mean, noticeably better. And I won't bore you with the details. I will nerd out completely with you if you'd like to know the details. But the issue is basically that previous models treated text as a sequence, and they would read forward, and then they would try and predict what would come next. And if you're trying to predict what's going to come next without knowing what comes afterwards, your guess is usually wrong. So the people at Google nearby said, why don't we read the whole sentence, basically, or read the whole text? And we can mask different parts and ask the machine to predict what part is missing. And so this is called a transformer model. It's a bidirectional transformer model. And what it does is it will go through the text and it will identify place names, it will identify persons, and it will identify keywords for you. So instead of just the human markup or the human description, we now have what the machine has found in the raw text itself. And this is different from just searching, because you could say, show me all the entries that have Moscow in it. That's fine. But if I ask it, well, what are the places that appear in this corpus? That's a much harder question. I mean, you can't ask that of a search engine. You can with BERT, I love holding the Communist Manifesto. I don't know where this came from, but it was on the internet. So if you're following the slides, there's a wonderful demo. They have two models. One is Rubert, which has, as I mentioned, organization, location, and person. That is the model that I worked with. They also have a multilingual BERT, which has a large number of persons, organizations, locations. It has a larger number of labels. And you can train it on new labels. So that's something that I'll talk about when Phil is speaking. As I mentioned, this comes from a project called Deep Pavlov at ITMO, and their primary interest is in creating a conversational artificial intelligence. So I have simply stolen their embeddings and their transformer model, which works really well, and I highly recommend it. It is also very large and very slow. So if you don't have the means, SlovNet is a very, very good resource. It's a much smaller version, and as they note, it's only 1 or 2% worse than the current BERT model. So, as things go, that's awfully good. So in this theme of machine reading, once I had the place names extracted from the text, say Homiaki, I ran this through GeoPy, which is a Python library working with OpenStreetMap. It's super easy. Well, I hate to say that. People have been critical of that, but it's relatively straightforward to take the text, the places that have been identified, and now I can add location information to them. MyStem is what I use for lemmatization. It's very fast. I also, at other points, use Spacy, which is also very effective, and probably something I'll use going forward. I've been working with Toma Tasovic to train a Serbian model, and we're also working on a Russian model. So that's what I would use going forward, although MyStem is very effective at taking the sentence and splitting it into tokens that you can work with. That's also really essential whenever you're looking quantitatively at the text, because you need tokens that are comparable, not declined or in different genders. So I mentioned that we found places. So 108,000 of the entries in this corpus have mention of spatial data. So I identified 3,742 distinct places. So I think it's interesting to hear this issue with there not being anyone from the Soviet republics or the post-Soviet republics or countries, but the people in this collection traveled a lot. they really got around, and it is very global in reach. So I think that was something that deserves being explored more. I mean, what were the geographic boundaries? What was the geographic imagination at different periods of history? And that is something that those are questions that you can ask using this corpus. Another library that we used on this is called Natasha. It's a very, very good library. This is a rule-based library that will basically, it has a giant list of names, and if it finds one of those names, it then looks around it and says, well, okay, I'm Ivan, or I found Ivan in this Ivanic, but oh, there's an Ivan before it, so this must be the patronymic. So it's an algorithm that will help you find, and you can see, I mean, it found Ivan Ivanic Samovar, so it doesn't know that Samovar is, I mean, Samovar it really can't be a last name, but it is in this case. So if you're working with text, this is a very effective way to machine read the text and identify the name parts. There's a Russian NLP project that I've been working on, and we trained a neural network version of this that is about as good. So I would highly recommend Natasha for this kind of work. So we start with 3,700 diaries and 3,000 people. So you can see basically what we knew of the collection was the authors. We knew the authors, and that was the only people we know. If we use Rubert to go through, we end up with 28,000 people. So there are 28,000 distinct people that appear in the diary entries. And I can point you to exactly where they appear. I can show you how many times they appear. And in many cases, we can look up, do they have a Wikipedia entry, or is there other data? So, I mean, for Phil and for people interested in network, suddenly we've taken this sort of raw text, which is useful and can be read and needs to be approached critically, but we immediately have an immense amount of information, which is relatively accurate. For Misha, Misha's especially interested in sentiment, well, in Asya also, we're looking at emotions. So you'll hear more about emotions in a much more sophisticated way. But one thing I did is I could run through every single of the 400,000 diary entries and see, is it positive, is it negative, is it neutral? And so, I love canned fish is positive, I hate canned fish is negative, and it actually correctly identifies I love canned fish, but I hate canned oysters as negative. So this is trained on data from Vkontakte, and the sentiment vectors are available as part of the library project. So if you're interested in not just the library, but also the data that they're using, if you're interested in opening up and understanding the data behind this, that's also available. And it lets us do stuff like this. And I think it's a good check. So here we have from 1800 to 2018. How was it? Was it a good year? Was it a bad year? And so, I mean, it lets us ask these questions at scale, which I think is really the essence of the digital humanities. And one of the things that's most exciting about it, and that it's still impressionistic in many ways. It's still based on a particular sample. It's based on a particular method. But we get to create things like this, and I think the fact that let's see here, 1941, 76% of the diary entries in 1941 are negative, and that would make sense that this was not a positive time. But then it also raises some questions, like 1821 was amazing. Like it was 88% of people of the entries in that year were positive. Why is that? It could be that it's a sample bias, probably is, but it'd be fun to investigate and to see some of these patterns. I mean, we also get, there has been historiography interested in in cycles in history. Is there evidence of that kind of approach or way of making sense of things in this data? Just looking at it, it does look somewhat cyclical. So understanding the nature of that, I think, could be a really fascinating question. This is the same data, but just this previous one, I've removed everything but the positive and negative, and it's just the positive and negative relative to each other. This is just the sum of entries, and you can see just how dramatic the beginning of the war and the war years are. But at the same time, we still see this phenomenon where there's a really this plateau. So I would love to understand that better. So I made lots of wrong turns in this project. I tried different things, so this was all very experimental. And my first thought on how to proceed was that people would want to take this corpus, and they only want a small part of it. I only study the 19th century, or I only study women authors, or I only study military diarists. And that would be fully understandable. And so what I started out was building something that would let you cut and slice and make your own data set from this larger corpus. And in the process of making that, one of the major shifts that I had to make was that in order to know how and what to slice, you have to know what's there. And so this Prožeta Danli application, we started from search, but then actually the browsing section became really the primary tool and most useful tool to understand, well, what's in here, how, what can I get to? So that's this, actually, if you click on this, but it's also just, I welcome you to explore this. It's live now. It's just projeta-db.apjan.co. So you can use this to explore by diary. You can explore the people that are in here, places, and also the entries where they appear. So not only do we get the place, but you can access the diary entry. So I encourage you to explore this and think of feedback, because this is here more or less as a prototype of, you know, what, and it's an open question of what do scholars need in order to work with these materials. So it allows you to explore those records as a table. It also allows you to create visualizations, which are interesting. I mean, in this case, we have, you know, a regular trend that makes sense, and then there are these absolutely incredibly prolific diary writers. So if you're interested in identifying a genre, who are these people? Like, I mean, it sounds like in part there's a process of entries being donated, but I mean, these are your super prolific diary writers. What makes those peculiar or sets them apart from the rest of the corpus? Because they clearly stick out. Okay. So you can browse it as a table, as a visualization. There are also maps. This isn't fully working, and in fact, I'm sort of waiting on, you know, is there demand for this kind of feature to explore the data in map form? And there's, as I mentioned, search. So you can put constraints on it and say, I'm only interested in 1961 and 1969, and entries where we have Cosmos, because I'm interested in the space race, for example. So you can use queries to slice the corpus into whatever shape you like. And currently, I have a JSON export. Again, there's a technical problem in that if you try and download the entire thing, the machine will break. So, I think we need better ways. There are probably, if someone wants the whole thing, they should just be able to download a CSV file. So I think thinking through the ways that are most needed and most useful to scholars to get at this data. That said, this gives us a manageable data set that you can download. I'm happy to add a CSV export if that's what people would like as well. So through this experience, there's definitely some stages that I've identified in this process, and I think are best done in isolation from one another. The process of cleaning the data is really central and takes a lot of time. Librarians are very good at that, and it's very much a library task, and it's important to really have good metadata, to have good evidence on the provenance of the text. And I think looking back, if I could redo this again, and Misha warned me that there was a lot of interesting things in there. So if you download it now, there's going to be a lot of garbage. So I wish I'd spent more time cleaning out the garbage, just so that you would get clean, useful text for scholarship. The next is to provide tools to visualize and explore the corpus. So that, I think, is a really distinct task. I didn't appreciate how important that was initially, and that, I think, the web application could really be specifically focused on that issue of what's in there and how to, what of value to my scholarship is in this corpus. And then finally, to transform that data and generate features for specific research questions. So over the course of this, how long have we been doing this? 6 months? It's a really long time. We've met weekly. It's really been an exciting process. But I kept thinking I would use the web application, but in the end, people needed very specific things. They needed data on the, and in specific formats. And so that should be definitely valued. And so Misha, for example, at one point had a theory about "ja," that when people refer to themselves in the diary as "ja," it could be an indicator of depression. And so, let me see, did I add it? Or yeah, no? I created a function that gives you a measure of ja-ness. And so at one point, I gave Misha a list of the most yawful diarists in the collection. And it turned out to actually have some meaningful signal in it.
Yeah, we have several, у нас было несколько самоубийц в этом списке, так что если это работает.
Yeah, so I think that this stage here is really a distinct part of the process, and where you want to have that back exchange, and you can be responsive and identify, usage of "ja" in very specific questions at scale for the entire collection. So my lesson learned from all of this would be to separate these three parts. So in getting from the SQL to the CSV, really identifying three stages in the pipeline where you do three very deliberate different things. And what I would love to make, and I don't know if anyone would use this other than myself, but would be a Python API or simply a REST API where you could import projeta, and then we'd for every diary, give me the diary author, give me the diary entries, and work with it programmatically. This is a paradigm that's very useful in the creation of developer tools. It might be useful in scholarship, but to the extent that there isn't interest or background, it might not be as useful. But this would expose the data immediately for whatever kind of processes or whatever analysis you would like to have. So these are my thoughts on this question of how we get there. It's deliberately rough. And so, yeah, thank you very much. And I look forward to sharing the scholarship that came out of this.